The sound of boots hitting concrete echoed through the Marine Corps training facility as dozens of fresh recruits marched in formation. Among them walked a young woman whose quiet demeanor and unassuming appearance made her nearly invisible to the seasoned drill instructors watching from the sidelines. What none of them knew was that beneath her calm exterior lay the mind of someone who had already faced more combat than most Marines would see in their entire careers. This is the true story of Sarah Chun, a 24-year-old woman whose past was buried so deep that even military intelligence had trouble piecing together the full picture. While her fellow recruits worried about passing basic training, Sarah carried secrets that would shock the Marine Corps to its core. She had learned long ago that sometimes the most dangerous warriors are the ones who never boast about their victories, never speak of their kills, and never let anyone see the storm that rages behind their quiet eyes. What started as routine hazing and mockery from fellow Marines would soon transform into something no one could have predicted. Because when you underestimate someone who has already survived the unthinkable, you're not just making a mistake. You're about to witness what real combat experience looks like when it's finally unleashed. Sarah Chun stepped off the bus at Marine Corps Recruit Depot Parris Island with nothing but a small duffel bag and memories she wished she could forget. The humid South Carolina air hit her face as she joined the line of nervous recruits, most of them barely out of high school, all of them trying to look tougher than they felt. At 24, Sarah was older than most, but her slight frame and quiet demeanor made her appear younger than her years. The drill instructor's voice boomed across the asphalt. "Listen up, maggots. For the next 13 weeks, this place is going to break you down and build you back up into United States Marines." His eyes scanned the group, lingering on Sarah with what looked like amusement. "Some of you think you're tough because you played football in high school or got into a few bar fights. You're about to learn what tough really means." Sarah kept her eyes forward, her face expressionless. She had heard similar speeches before, though not in English. The words of her former commander in the Kurdish Women's Protection Units echoed in her mind. A true warrior never advertises their strength. They let their actions speak when words have failed. The processing began immediately. Recruits were shuffled from station to station, filling out paperwork, getting medical examinations, and receiving their initial gear. Sarah moved through each checkpoint with mechanical precision, answering questions with the minimum required information. When asked about her previous military experience, she simply checked none on the form. Technically, it wasn't a lie. The YPJ wasn't recognized as a formal military by the United States, and her service record had been classified and buried so deep that even she wasn't sure who had access to it anymore. During the gear issue, Private First Class Martinez, a cocky recruit from Texas who had appointed himself the unofficial leader of their group, made his first mistake. "Hey, China girl," he called out, using a racial slur that made Sarah's jaw tighten imperceptibly. "You sure you're in the right line? The Peace Corps recruitment might be down the street." Several other recruits laughed nervously. They were all scared, all posturing, all trying to establish some kind of pecking order before the real training began. Sarah had seen it before in every military unit she'd ever encountered. Young men, full of testosterone and insecurity, using aggression to mask their fear. "My name is Sarah," she replied quietly, not turning to face Martinez. "And I'm exactly where I need to be." Martinez stepped closer, emboldened by what he perceived as weakness. "Oh, she talks. Tell me, Sarah, what makes you think you can cut it here? You look like a strong wind would blow you over." Sarah finally turned to look at him. Her dark eyes were calm, almost serene, but there was something behind them that made Martinez unconsciously take a half-step back. It was the same look she'd worn when she'd held her position on a rooftop in Kobani for 17 hours straight, watching through her scope as ISIS fighters tried to overrun their defensive line. "I guess we'll find out," she said simply, then turned back to receive her gear. The first few days of recruit training followed the familiar pattern Sarah remembered from her initial training with the YPJ, though the American approach was different. Where her Kurdish trainers had focused on practical skills born from immediate necessity, the Marines emphasized tradition, ceremony, and psychological conditioning. Sarah adapted quickly, her movements efficient and precise in a way that gradually began to catch the attention of the drill instructors. During physical training, while other recruits struggled with pull-ups and ran out of breath during morning runs, Sarah moved with an economy of motion that spoke of extensive conditioning. She wasn't the fastest runner in the group, but she never seemed to tire. She didn't do the most pull-ups, but her form was flawless. Most importantly, She never complained, never boasted, and never drew unnecessary attention to herself. This restraint only seemed to irritate Martinez and his growing circle of followers more. They interpreted her quiet competence as arrogance, her refusal to engage in their verbal sparring as condescension. The fact that she outperformed them without seeming to try particularly hard was salt in the wound. "I'm telling you, there's something off about that girl," Martinez told his bunkmates one evening as they cleaned their rifles. "Nobody's that calm on their first week. She's either crazy or hiding something." Private Williams, a farm boy from Iowa, looked up from his weapon. "Maybe she's just focused, man. Some people handle stress differently. Or maybe she's a plant," suggested Private Johnson, always ready to embrace a conspiracy theory. "Maybe she's some kind of military intelligence officer here to spy on us." Martinez shook his head. "Look at her. She's barely 5'4" and weighs maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. She's not spy material. She's just some college girl who watched too many war movies and thinks she can play soldier." What none of them knew was that Sarah lay in her bunk each night, not thinking about the next day's training, but about the friends she'd lost in Syria. She thought about Rajan, the 19-year-old sniper who had taught her how to calculate wind drift and had died with Sarah's name on her lips. She thought about Commander Amara, who had given Sarah her first rifle and had been killed by a mortar round while trying to evacuate wounded civilians. The nightmares came regularly, as they had for the past 2 years. Sometimes she dreamed of the weight of her rifle, the familiar comfort of her Barrett M82 sniper system. Sometimes she dreamed of the faces in her scope, the moment of absolute stillness before the trigger pull, the knowledge that each shot meant one less enemy threatening her friends and the innocent people they protected. But she never spoke of these dreams, never let them show on her face during the day. The other recruits saw what she wanted them to see: a quiet, competent woman who seemed almost boring in her steadfast refusal to engage in drama. The first real test came during their initial combat training exercise. The drill instructors had set up a mock urban warfare scenario, with recruits divided into teams and given objectives to complete while being harassed by instructors playing enemy forces. It was designed to be chaotic, confusing, and frustrating, a way to see how recruits reacted under pressure. Sarah found herself on a team led by Martinez, who had managed to convince the instructors that his high school ROTC experience made him leadership material. Their mission was simple: advance through a series of buildings, eliminate simulated enemy targets, and secure a mock objective. From the moment they began, it was clear that Martinez was in over his head. He barked contradictory orders, positioned his team members poorly, and showed no understanding of basic tactical principles. Within minutes, half their team had been killed by instructors with paint rounds, and they were pinned down behind inadequate cover. "What do we do now, Sergeant?" one of the remaining recruits asked Martinez, using the title he'd given himself. Martinez's face was red with frustration and embarrassment. We should." He looked around desperately, clearly lost. Sarah had been watching the instructors' positions, noting their patterns of movement, identifying the weak points in their defensive setup. She could see exactly how to complete the mission, but she also knew that speaking up would only increase the hostility she was already facing from her teammates. "Martinez," she said quietly, "if you position Williams and Johnson on the left flank while we provide covering fire from here, they can get around behind the instructor in Building 2. Once he's eliminated, we have a clear path to the objective." Martinez turned on her, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "Did I ask for your opinion? Just because you think you're hot stuff doesn't mean you know anything about tactics." Sarah fell silent, but not before several of the drill instructors had noticed the exchange. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran of 3 combat deployments, had been watching Sarah carefully since the exercise began. He had noticed her positioning, her awareness of the tactical situation, and the way her eyes constantly scanned for threats and opportunities. The exercise ended with Martinez's team failing their objective completely. As they gathered for the after-action review, Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside. "Chun," he said, studying her face carefully, "where did you learn to read a tactical situation like that?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Books, Staff Sergeant. I've always been interested in military history and tactics." Rodriguez nodded slowly, but something in his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Books, huh? Well, keep studying. You might actually make a Marine." That night, as the other recruits complained about their performance and blamed each other for their failures, Sarah lay in her bunk and thought about her first combat mission with the YPJ. She had been 19 years old, scared out of her mind, but determined to prove herself worthy of the rifle she'd been given. Her target that day had been an ISIS sniper who had killed 3 of her friends from a concealed position in a bombed-out building. She remembered the weight of her rifle, the way her hands had shaken as she lined up the shot. She remembered the moment of perfect clarity when her breathing steadied, her heart rate slowed, and the world narrowed down to the crosshairs of her scope, and the figure barely visible in a window 800 meters away. The shot had been perfect. Her first confirmed kill. Commander Amara had clapped her on the shoulder afterward and told her she was born for this work. Sarah had felt pride then, and satisfaction, and the grim knowledge that she had saved lives by taking one. Now, lying in a bunk surrounded by young Americans who thought war was a game, she wondered if she would ever be able to explain to them what real combat meant. Not the glory they imagined, not the heroic narratives they'd absorbed from movies, but the weight of responsibility, the burden of necessary violence, and the way killing changes you even when it's absolutely justified. The mockery from Martinez and his followers continued to escalate over the following days. They called her princess and college girl, made jokes about her size and her quiet demeanor. They questioned her commitment, her courage, and her right to be there. Sarah endured it all with the same calm expression she'd worn while under sniper fire in Aleppo. What they didn't understand was that their words couldn't touch her. She had been tested in ways they couldn't imagine, had proven herself in circumstances that would have broken most people. Their childish attempts at intimidation were nothing compared to the psychological warfare she'd endured from ISIS fighters who had broadcast threats specifically targeting her after her reputation as a sniper had spread. But Sarah also knew that her restraint had limits. She had learned long ago that sometimes peace required the demonstration of strength, that sometimes the only way to end harassment was to show exactly why harassing her was a mistake. She just hoped, for everyone's sake, that these young Marines would learn some wisdom before she was forced to provide them with an education they would never forget. 3 weeks into training, the harassment had evolved from casual mockery to something more systematic and cruel. Martinez had convinced several other recruits to join his campaign against Sarah, framing it as a test of whether she belonged among Marines. They hid her gear, accidentally bumped into her during formations, and spread rumors about her background that grew more elaborate with each telling. The drill instructors noticed the tension, but didn't intervene. In their experience, recruit training naturally sorted out who could handle the pressure and who couldn't. What they didn't realize was that they were watching a predator being stalked by prey who had no understanding of what they were provoking. Sarah's breaking point came during a routine marksmanship training session. The recruits had been working with M16A4 rifles, learning basic shooting positions and fundamentals. For most of them, it was their first time firing anything more powerful than a hunting rifle. For Sarah, it was like being handed a child's toy after years of working with precision instruments designed for war. She had been deliberately shooting at the level of an average recruit, grouping her shots well enough to avoid attention, but not so well as to stand out. It was a delicate balance, and one that required considerable skill to maintain. A truly poor marksman would have struggled to shoot that consistently mediocre. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had been watching her target through binoculars, noting the subtle patterns in her shot placement that suggested far more control than she was displaying. Each group was tight enough to show competence, but loose enough to suggest she was still learning. It was exactly what someone would do if they were trying to hide their true capabilities. After the shooting session, as recruits were cleaning their rifles, Martinez decided to escalate his campaign. He waited until several instructors were nearby, then spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Hey Chen, how'd you do out there? Actually hit the target this time, or were you too scared of the big bad rifle?" His voice carried the particular tone of someone performing for an audience. Sarah continued cleaning her weapon without looking up. "I did fine, Martinez." "Fine? That's not what I heard. Johnson told me you were shaking so bad you could barely hold the rifle steady." Martinez grinned as several recruits snickered. "Maybe you should have stayed home and let a real warrior take your spot." The word warrior hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had earned that title in blood and sacrifice, had carried it through battles that would have reduced Martinez to a sobbing child. To hear him use it so casually, so dismissively, while questioning her courage was more than she could silently endure. Sarah set down her rifle and stood up slowly, turning to face Martinez for the first time since the harassment had begun. The change in her posture was subtle but unmistakable. Where before she had seemed small and defensive. Now she moved with the controlled grace of someone who had learned to be dangerous. A real warrior? She asked quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet barracks. Tell me, Martinez, what do you think makes someone a warrior? Martinez sensed he had struck a nerve and pressed forward, not recognizing the warning signs that any experienced soldier would have read immediately. Courage under fire. The willingness to fight for your country. The strength to handle real combat, not just play act like some people do. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. And you think you have those qualities? Damn right I do. I've been preparing for this my whole life. I know what it takes to be a Marine, and I know what it looks like when someone doesn't belong. The barracks had gone completely silent now. Even the drill instructors had stopped what they were doing to watch the exchange. Something had shifted in the atmosphere, though most of the recruits couldn't identify what they were sensing. Sarah stepped closer to Martinez, and he instinctively backed up half a step before catching himself. She was still smaller than him, still appeared physically unthreatening, but there was something in her eyes now that made his survival instincts scream warnings he couldn't understand. Let me tell you what I think makes a warrior, Martinez, Sarah said, her voice still quiet but carrying an authority that made everyone lean in to listen. A warrior is someone who has looked death in the face and chosen to stand their ground anyway. A warrior is someone who has killed to protect the innocent and carried that weight every day since. A warrior is someone who has watched their friends die and kept fighting because giving up meant more people would suffer. She paused, studying his face as understanding began to dawn on him that he had made a terrible miscalculation. A warrior is someone who has earned the right to that title through sacrifice and pain you can't even imagine. It's not a word you throw around to make yourself feel important. Martinez tried to rally, his voice shaking slightly. Big talk from someone who probably never even held a gun before coming here. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something cold and final entered her voice. I held my first rifle when I was 19 years old. It was a Kalashnikov AK-47, standard infantry weapon for the People's Protection Units. My second rifle was a Dragunov SVD sniper system. My third was a Barrett M82A1 anti-material rifle, effective range 1,500 meters. The silence in the barracks was now absolute. Every recruit and drill instructor was staring at Sarah, trying to process what they were hearing. My fourth rifle was a Chaitak M200 intervention, which I used for precision long-range work when the target required absolute certainty. My fifth rifle was a modified accuracy international Arctic warfare that I carried for my last 18 months in theater. Martinez's face had gone pale. You're lying. You're making all this up. Sarah continued as if he hadn't spoken. I served with the Women's Protection Units in Syria for 3 years. I participated in the defense of Kobani, the liberation of Tel Afar, and 14 other major combat operations. I was assigned to sniper duties because I demonstrated exceptional marksmanship and the psychological stability required for precision elimination of high-value targets. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, his face a mixture of shock and growing understanding. Chun, are you telling us you served with the YPJ? Sarah turned to face him, and for the first time since arriving at Paris Island, she allowed her true self to show in her posture and expression. She stood like a soldier now, not a recruit. Her eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen combat and survived it. Yes, Staff Sergeant. I served with YPJ from 2019 to 2022. I was honorably discharged after sustaining injuries in an IED attack near Deir ez-Zor. My service record is classified, but I can provide contact information for verification if required. The barracks erupted in whispers and shocked exclamations, but Rodriguez held up a hand for silence. His mind was racing, connecting dots he should have seen earlier. The way she moved, her tactical awareness, her complete lack of fear during stress exercises, it all made sense now. How many confirmed kills? He asked quietly. Sarah met his gaze steadily. 107 confirmed, Staff Sergeant. 43 unconfirmed, but probable. The number hit the barracks like a physical blow. Martinez stumbled backward as if he'd been slapped. These weren't the inflated kill counts of video game fantasy or the boastful lies of wannabe soldiers. This was the quiet, matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting actual combat statistics. Jesus Christ, whispered Private Williams. She's killed more people than some entire Marine units. Sarah turned back to Martinez, who was now visibly shaking. You asked what makes someone a warrior, Martinez. The answer is experience. Real experience, not the fantasy you've built up in your head about what combat is like. She stepped closer to him again, and This time he didn't try to hide his instinctive retreat. Every single one of those kills was justified. Every shot I took was to protect civilians, to defend my position, or to eliminate enemy combatants who were threatening my unit. I never killed for pleasure, never killed in anger, and never killed without being absolutely certain of my target. That's what separates a warrior from a murderer. Martinez tried to speak, but no words came out. He was beginning to understand the enormity of his mistake, the depth of his ignorance about the woman he had been tormenting. I came here not because I need to prove my courage or learn how to be tough, Sarah continued. I came here because I want to serve my adopted country the same way I serve the people of Syria. I want to use the skills I've learned in the defense of freedom and human dignity. She paused, letting that sink in before delivering her final point. I have never once mentioned my background or used it to intimidate anyone. I have endured 3 weeks of your childish harassment without retaliation because I hoped you would eventually grow up and learn some respect. But you have pushed me past the point where silence serves any useful purpose. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez found his voice. Chun, why didn't you report your military experience during processing? Sarah turned to him with a slight shrug. The YPJ is not recognized as a formal military organization by the United States government, Staff Sergeant. Technically, I was a volunteer in a militia unit. I checked no previous military experience, because that was the accurate answer according to American standards. But your skills, your knowledge, we could have accelerated your training, put you in an advanced track. I didn't want special treatment, Staff Sergeant. I wanted to earn my place here the same way as everyone else. I wanted to learn the Marine Corps way of doing things without my previous experience creating expectations or resentment. She glanced around the barracks at the faces staring at her with mixtures of awe, fear, and newfound respect. Unfortunately, some people interpreted my desire to fit in as weakness. They mistook humility for incompetence and restraint for cowardice. Martinez finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Sarah studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was neither angry nor forgiving, simply factual. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You made assumptions based on ignorance and prejudice, then used those assumptions to justify treating another human being with cruelty and disrespect. The fact that you now feel sorry doesn't change the character you revealed through your actions. She turned to address the entire barracks now, her voice carrying the authority of hard-won experience. All of you need to understand something. The military is not a game. It's not a place where you get to play out your fantasies about being a hero. It's a profession that requires maturity, respect, and the humility to recognize that you don't know everything. She looked specifically at Martinez again. A real warrior knows that strength doesn't come from dominating others. It comes from protecting others, even when they haven't earned that protection. It comes from doing the right thing even when it's difficult or thankless. Sarah walked back to her bunk and resumed cleaning her rifle, her movements now carrying the unconscious efficiency of someone who had performed this task thousands of times under every conceivable condition. The barracks remained silent for several minutes as everyone processed what they had learned. Finally, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached Sarah's bunk. Chun, I need to make some phone calls. Your training status may need to be reviewed. Sarah looked up at him calmly. I understand, Staff Sergeant. I'm prepared to answer any questions and provide whatever verification is required. Rodriguez nodded, then addressed the entire barracks. Listen up, all of you. What you just heard doesn't leave this room until I've had a chance to sort this out through proper channels. Chin's service record is her business, and anyone who spreads rumors or talks out of turn will answer to me personally. As the drill instructor left to make his calls, the other recruits slowly began to move around again. But the atmosphere had changed permanently. The casual camaraderie that had existed before was gone, replaced by a mixture of respect, curiosity, and uncomfortable awareness of their own inadequacies. Martinez sat on his bunk staring at the floor, clearly struggling with the realization that he had spent 3 weeks bullying someone who could have ended his life without breaking a sweat. The other recruits who had joined in his harassment looked equally shaken, suddenly, understanding that their actions hadn't been harmless pranks but genuine cruelty directed at someone who had sacrificed more for freedom than they could comprehend. Sarah continued cleaning her rifle, her face calm and focused. She felt no satisfaction at Martinez's humiliation, no sense of victory at having silenced her tormentors. If anything, she felt sad that it had come to this, that these young people had forced her to reveal truths she would have preferred to keep private. She thought about Commander Amara's words from her final letter, received just days before Sarah left Syria. You carry our victories with you, but you also carry our responsibility. Use your gifts wisely, and never forget that a true warrior's greatest weapon is not their rifle, but their wisdom. As she reassembled her weapon, Sarah wondered if revealing her past had been wise, or if it would only create new complications in her journey to become a United States Marine. But she also knew that some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Martinez and the others had pushed her beyond the point where silence was sustainable, and now they would all have to live with the consequences of that choice. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez spent the next 18 hours making phone calls that reached from Paris Island to the Pentagon, from CIA field offices in Turkey to Special Operations Command in Tampa. What he discovered in those conversations would change not only Sarah Chin's training trajectory, but the entire understanding of what the Marine Corps had unknowingly recruited. The first call was to his battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, a gruff veteran who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Rodriguez explained the situation carefully, emphasizing both Sarah's claims and his own observations of her unusual competence. You're telling me we have a Chinese-American sniper with over 100 confirmed kills who's been going through regular recruit training? Hayes asked, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and concern. Yes, sir. Her tactical awareness, marksmanship fundamentals, and general military bearing are unlike anything I've seen from a recruit. She's been deliberately underperforming to avoid attention. Hayes was quiet for a moment. What's her security clearance status? Unknown, sir. She claims her service record is classified. I need guidance on how to proceed with verification. Don't do anything else until you hear from me. I'm going to make some calls. Hayes's first contact was Major General Patricia Morrison at Marine Corps Intelligence Activity. Morrison had spent 15 years in various intelligence roles and had extensive contacts throughout the special operations and intelligence communities. When Hayes explained the situation, her response was immediate and concerning. Colonel, if this recruit is who she claims to be, then we have a significant security issue. The YPJ sniper known as Amira's Shadow was one of the most effective anti-ISIS operatives in the Syrian theater. Her existence was known to U.S. intelligence, but her identity was kept classified to protect her from retaliation. Hayes felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying this recruit might be that operative? I'm saying we need to find out immediately. I'm going to reach out to some contacts who worked with YPJ liaisons. Give me 12 hours. Morrison's calls led her to Captain James Mitchell, a former Green Beret who had served as an advisor to Kurdish forces during the height of the anti-ISIS campaign. Mitchell was now working as a contractor, but he maintained relationships throughout the special operations community. Pat, you're asking about the Kobani Angel, Mitchell said when Morrison described Sarah's claims. That's what the Kurdish fighters called her. Real name was Sarah Chun, American citizen who joined YPJ after finishing college. She was absolutely legitimate. I worked with her unit during the Tel Afar operation. Morrison leaned forward in her chair. Tell me about her capabilities. She was exceptional, not just as a marksman, though her shooting was world-class. She had an instinct for tactics that most officers take years to develop. The Kurds trusted her with their most sensitive operations because she never missed and never left anyone behind. What happened to her? Mitchell's voice became somber. IED attack in late 2022. She was conducting overwatch for a humanitarian convoy when they hit a buried explosive. 3 Kurdish fighters died, and Chun was badly injured. She spent 4 months in a German military hospital, then disappeared from our radar. Disappeared how? She requested repatriation to the United States and refused any further intelligence contact. Last I heard, she was trying to get on with her life as a civilian. I guess that didn't work out. Morrison thanked Mitchell and immediately called Hayes back with her findings. Within 2 hours, a classified briefing was being prepared for the Marine Corps Commandant, and Sarah Chin's recruit training had been quietly suspended pending a full security review. Sarah knew something was happening when she was pulled from morning PT and escorted to an administrative building she had never seen before. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez accompanied her but remained silent during the walk, his expression unreadable. The room she was brought to contained 3 people she didn't recognize: a female Marine Corps officer with stars on her collar, a man in civilian clothes who had the bearing of intelligence personnel, and a woman in Navy uniform with medical insignia. The Marine general spoke first. Recruit Chun, I'm Major General Morrison. These are Mr. Williams from the Defense Intelligence Agency and Commander Sarah Davis, a military psychiatrist. We need to discuss your background. Sarah came to attention automatically. Yes, ma'am. Please sit down. This isn't a disciplinary hearing. We're here to verify your claims and determine how to proceed with your training. Sarah took the offered chair but remained at attention mentally. She had expected this moment since revealing her background, and she was prepared for the questions that would follow. Morrison opened a thick file folder. We've confirmed your identity and your service with the YPJ. We've also confirmed your combat record, including your confirmed kill count. What we need to understand is why you didn't disclose this information during your initial recruitment. Sarah considered her words carefully. Ma'am, I believe that my previous service would either disqualify me from enlistment or result in special treatment that I didn't want. I wanted to earn my place in the Marines based on my performance here, not on my previous experience. Williams, the DIA representative, leaned forward. Ms. Chun, your previous service makes you one of the most combat-experienced personnel to ever enter Marine Corps training. Your tactical knowledge and combat skills exceed those of most Marine officers. Why do you want to start over as a recruit? Sarah had been asking herself that question for months. Sir, my experience with the YPJ was valuable, but it was also specific to a particular type of conflict in a particular environment. I want to learn the Marine Corps approach to warfare. I want to understand American military doctrine and integrate my previous experience with formal training. You could have applied for a direct commission as an officer, Morrison pointed out. With your background, you would have been an excellent candidate for intelligence or special operations roles. Ma'am, I've been leading life and death operations since I was 19 years old. I've made decisions that determined whether people lived or died, whether missions succeeded or failed. I'm tired of carrying that responsibility alone. I want to be part of a team, to follow orders instead of giving them, at least for a while. Commander Davis spoke for the first time. Sarah, may I call you Sarah? Your psychological evaluation from your medical treatment in Germany indicates you were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder following your injury. How are you managing those symptoms? Sarah appreciated the doctor's direct approach. Commander, I have nightmares. I have hypervigilance responses. I sometimes dissociate during loud noises. But I've learned to manage these symptoms, and they don't interfere with my ability to function. Have you sought treatment? I received counseling in Germany and continued therapy for 6 months after returning to the United States. I've learned coping mechanisms that work for me. Davis made a note in her file. Combat trauma is serious, Sarah. The Marine Corps has excellent mental health resources, but we need to be sure you're not using military service as a way to avoid dealing with unresolved issues. Sarah met the psychiatrist's gaze steadily. Commander, I'm not running from my trauma. I'm trying to use my experience constructively. I know what war costs, and I know what freedom is worth. I want to serve my country with that knowledge. Morrison consulted her notes. Your former unit commander in the YPJ, the woman known as Commander Amara, provided a character reference before her death. She described you as the finest soldier I ever had the honor to serve with, and said that any military force would be privileged to have her service. Sarah's composure cracked slightly at the mention of Amara. The commander had been killed 6 months after Sarah's evacuation, during an operation to liberate a village held by ISIS remnants. Sarah had learned about her death through Kurdish diaspora networks, and the news had been devastating. Amara was the best leader I ever served under. She taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite being afraid. Morrison closed the file and studied Sarah carefully. Here's our situation, Chun. You're clearly overqualified for standard recruit training, but you've also been deliberately concealing capabilities that could have significant operational value. We need to decide how to proceed. Williams added, there are several special operations units that would be very interested in your background. Your experience with unconventional warfare and your cultural knowledge of the Middle East make you a valuable asset. Sarah shook her head. Sir, with respect, I don't want to be treated as an asset. I want to be a Marine. If that means completing standard training, then that's what I want to do. Morrison exchanged glances with Williams and Davis. What if we offered a compromise? Complete your basic training with your current platoon, but with additional advanced instruction in areas where your experience gives you expertise. We could also arrange for you to work with our sniper school as a training assistant. Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want special treatment. I want to succeed or fail on the same terms as every other recruit. Davis leaned back in her chair. Sarah, can I ask you something? What are you really trying to prove by doing this the hard way? The question hit deeper than Sarah had expected. She was quiet for a long moment, searching for the right words. Commander, when I was with the YPJ, I was fighting for survival. Every day was about staying alive and keeping my friends alive. The mission was clear, the enemy was obvious, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. But it was also chaotic, desperate, and brutal in ways that most people can't imagine. She paused, organizing her thoughts. I want to understand what it means to be a professional soldier in a professional military. I want to learn discipline that comes from tradition and training, not just from necessity. I want to be part of something larger than immediate survival. Morrison nodded slowly. I think I understand. You want to transform your combat experience into something more structured and sustainable. Yes, ma'am. I know how to fight, and I know how to kill, but I want to learn how to be a complete Marine. That includes learning to follow orders, to work within a system, to contribute to something bigger than my individual skills. Williams consulted his own notes. There is one security concern we need to address. Your previous service and your combat record could make you a target for foreign intelligence services or terrorist organizations. We need to consider operational security measures. Sarah had been expecting this. Sir, I understand the risks. I'm prepared to accept whatever security protocols are deemed necessary. Morrison made her decision. Here's what we're going to do. You'll continue with your current training platoon, but you'll receive additional instruction in advanced marksmanship and small unit tactics. Your background will be disclosed to your drill instructors on a need-to-know basis, but not to other recruits unless they specifically ask you about it. Ma'am, the other recruits already know. That's how this conversation started. Morrison sighed. Then, we'll brief them on operational security and make sure they understand that discussing your background outside the platoon is a security violation. Davis added, you'll also receive regular psychological evaluations to monitor your adjustment. Combat veterans transitioning to peacetime military service face unique challenges. Williams stood up. Ms. Chun, I want you to know that your service with the YPJ was valued by the United States government. Your actions helped save thousands of civilian lives and contributed significantly to the defeat of ISIS in eastern Syria. Sarah felt a wave of emotion she hadn't expected. For 2 years, she had wondered if her sacrifice had meant anything beyond the immediate tactical victories. To hear official recognition of her contribution was both validating and overwhelming. Thank you, sir. That means a lot. Morrison extended her hand. Welcome to the Marine Corps, Chun. I have a feeling you're going to do great things here. As Sarah was escorted back to her barracks, she reflected on the conversation. The questions had been fair, the concerns legitimate, and the outcome better than she had hoped. She would be able to continue her training while receiving the advanced instruction that would help her integrate her previous experience with Marine Corps doctrine. But she also knew that the real test was still ahead. Her fellow recruits now knew who she really was, and that knowledge would change every interaction going forward. Some would treat her with newfound respect, others might feel intimidated or resentful. The careful anonymity she had cultivated was gone forever. When she returned to the barracks, she found her fellow recruits waiting for her with expressions ranging from curiosity to awe to apprehension. Martinez looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez called for attention. Listen up, people. Chin's background has been verified and her training status has been confirmed. She will continue with this platoon as a regular recruit. Her previous experience is classified information, and discussing it outside this group is a violation of operational security that will result in immediate disciplinary action. He paused, looking around the room. That said, Chen has graciously agreed to share some of her knowledge through additional instruction sessions. You'll all have the opportunity to learn from someone with real combat experience. Private Williams raised his hand. Staff Sergeant, does this mean Chen outranks us? Rodriguez shook his head. Chen has no rank in the Marine Corps. She's a recruit, same as all of you. Her previous service was with a foreign militia, not the U.S. military. She'll be treated the same as any other recruit. But, even as Rodriguez spoke, Sarah could see that things had already changed. The way the other recruits looked at her, the unconscious deference in their posture, the mixture of respect and fear in their eyes. She was no longer just another recruit trying to become a Marine. She was a warrior who had already proven herself in ways they were only beginning to understand, and that knowledge would shape every day of training that followed. The weeks following Sarah's revelation transformed the dynamics of Platoon 3012 in ways that no one could have anticipated. What began as a standard recruit training cycle evolved into something unprecedented. a classroom where the student had more combat experience than most of the instructors. The first advanced training session was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had arranged for Sarah to conduct a practical demonstration of advanced marksmanship techniques, with participation voluntary for any recruit who was interested. Every single member of the platoon showed up, along with 3 drill instructors from other platoons who had heard rumors about the unusual recruit. Sarah stood before the group at the rifle range, holding the standard M16A4 that all recruits used for training. She had spent the previous evening planning her approach, trying to find ways to share her knowledge without overwhelming her fellow recruits or making them feel inadequate. "Before we start," she said, her voice carrying easily across the group, "I want everyone to understand something. The techniques I'm going to show you today aren't magic. They're the result of thousands of hours of practice under extremely stressful conditions. Don't expect to master them immediately, and don't get discouraged if they seem difficult at first." Martinez, who had been wrestling with shame and confusion since learning Sarah's true background, raised his hand hesitantly. "Chun, I have to ask, how did you learn all this? I mean, where did your training come from?" Sarah had been expecting this question. "When I joined the YPJ, I received basic marksmanship instruction from a Kurdish army veteran named Sergeant Hakim. He had trained with German Special Forces and British SAS instructors. My advanced training came from trial and error under combat conditions, and from working with other snipers who had experience from various military backgrounds." She gestured toward the targets downrange. "The most important lesson I learned was that marksmanship is 10% technique and 90% mental discipline. Anyone can learn to shoot accurately on a range. The challenge is maintaining that accuracy when people are shooting back at you." For the next 2 hours, Sarah walked the recruits through advanced shooting positions, breathing techniques, and methods for calculating range and wind compensation. But what struck the observers most was not her technical knowledge, but her teaching ability. She had a gift for breaking down complex concepts into understandable steps, and she showed infinite patience with recruits who struggled to grasp new techniques. Private Williams, who had emerged as one of the better marksmen in the platoon, was having difficulty with a particular prone shooting position. Sarah knelt beside him, her voice gentle and encouraging. "The problem isn't your aim, Williams. You're trying too hard to control the rifle. Let it settle naturally. Then, work with its movement instead of fighting against it." "I don't understand," Williams said, frustration clear in his voice. Sarah thought for a moment, then used an analogy that would resonate. "You've driven a car on a gravel road, right? When you hit loose gravel, you don't fight the steering wheel. You ease off the gas, relax your grip, and let the car find its own path through the rough spot. Same principle here." Williams tried again, this time allowing the rifle to settle naturally instead of forcing it into position. His next 3 shots formed a tight group in the center of the target. "Holy shit," he whispered, then immediately looked around nervously. "Sorry, I mean." Sarah smiled. "I've heard worse language, Williams. That's good shooting." Gunnery Sergeant Price, the senior marksmanship instructor, had been watching Sarah work with quiet amazement. After the session ended, he approached her with a troubled expression. "Chun, I've been teaching marksmanship for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone break down advanced techniques the way you just did. Some of those methods, where the hell did you learn them?" Sarah studied his face, trying to gauge his reaction. "Gunny, most of what I showed today came from practical necessity. When your life depends on making a shot under difficult conditions, you develop techniques that work. That windage calculation method you demonstrated, that's not in any manual I've ever seen. It's not in any manual because I developed it myself. I was operating in an environment where wind patterns changed constantly due to urban heat effects and building configurations. Standard calculation methods weren't accurate enough." Price shook his head slowly. "Chun, you realize you just taught these recruits techniques that most Marine snipers don't learn until advanced courses? Some of what you showed is beyond what we teach at Scout Sniper School." Sarah felt a moment of concern. "Gunny, I hope I didn't overstep. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez asked me to share some advanced techniques." Price held up a hand. "You didn't overstep. What you did was give these recruits a glimpse of what's possible with dedication and experience. But it also raised some questions about our curriculum." Over the following weeks, Sarah's unofficial role as advanced instructor expanded beyond marksmanship. The drill instructors began asking her to demonstrate urban warfare techniques, small unit tactics, and field medicine procedures. Each session revealed new depths to her knowledge and experience. During a combat medical training exercise, Sarah was asked to demonstrate battlefield triage procedures. What should have been a routine demonstration of basic first aid became a masterclass in trauma medicine under fire. The first rule of battlefield medicine, Sarah explained as she worked on a training mannequin designed to simulate gunshot wounds, is that dead medics can't save anyone. Always secure your position before treating casualties. She moved with practiced efficiency, her hands steady and sure as she demonstrated proper wound packing techniques. In Syria, medical supplies were limited, so we had to be creative. T-shirts can be turned into tourniquets, shoelaces can secure bandages, and duct tape can seal chest wounds if you don't have proper equipment. Corpsman Johnson, a Navy medical specialist who was assisting with the training, watched Sarah work with growing respect. "Chun, where did you learn these techniques?" Sarah continued working as she answered. "Combat necessity, Corpsman. When you're responsible for keeping your unit operational in an environment where the nearest hospital is 200 miles away, you learn to improvise." She demonstrated a technique for stabilizing a sucking chest wound using materials that could be found in any soldier's pack. This particular method I learned from a former French Foreign Legion medic who was volunteering with our unit. He developed it during operations in Mali. The training exercise that would become legendary among Platoon 3012 came during their urban warfare instruction. The drill instructors had set up a complex scenario involving hostage rescue in a mock urban environment. Standard doctrine called for a slow, methodical clearing procedure that minimized risk to friendly forces. Sarah watched the first two teams attempt the scenario, noting their adherence to textbook procedures and their predictable failure to complete the mission within the time constraints. When her turn came, she requested permission to demonstrate an alternative approach. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the standard clearing procedure we've been taught is designed for situations where you have overwhelming force and unlimited time. In real urban combat, you often have neither. May I show an alternative method? Rodriguez, who had been growing increasingly curious about Sarah's tactical knowledge, agreed. "Show us what you've got, Chun." What followed was a display of urban warfare expertise that left the drill instructor speechless. Sarah moved through the mock building with fluid efficiency, using techniques that balanced speed with security in ways that seemed to defy conventional wisdom. She cleared rooms faster than anyone thought possible while maintaining complete situational awareness and precise fire discipline. The hostage rescue scenario that had taken other teams 15 minutes to complete unsuccessfully was finished by Sarah in under 4 minutes with no friendly casualties and all objectives achieved. Sergeant Major Thompson, the battalion's senior enlisted advisor, had come to observe after hearing reports about the unusual recruit. He watched Sarah's performance with the analytical eye of someone who had seen combat in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. After the exercise, he pulled Rodriguez aside. "Sergeant, that recruit just demonstrated advanced urban warfare techniques that we don't teach until the School of Infantry. Some of what she did is close-quarters battle methodology that's classified at the special operations level." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Sergeant Major, I'm beginning to understand that we don't have a recruit. We have a combat veteran who's been pretending to be a recruit." Thompson studied Sarah, who was calmly explaining her techniques to a group of fascinated recruits. "The question is, what do we do with her?" The answer came sooner than expected. Major General Morrison arrived at Paris Island 3 days later with a small entourage that included representatives from Marine Corps Special Operations Command, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the Pentagon's Special Operations Policy Office. Sarah was once again called to an administrative building, this time to a conference room filled with high-ranking officers she didn't recognize. The atmosphere was formal and serious in a way that made her previous interview seem casual by comparison. A Marine Corps colonel with silver eagles on his collar spoke first. "Recruit Chun, I'm Colonel Marcus Webb from Marine Corps Special Operations Command. We've been reviewing your training performance and the reports from your drill instructors." Sarah came to attention. "Yes, sir. Your tactical knowledge and combat experience exceed that of most Marine officers. Your teaching ability has impressed every instructor who has worked with you. Your fellow recruits speak of you with a level of respect that's unusual for someone who's technically their peer." Webb paused, consulting his notes. "We have a proposition for you." Sarah waited silently, having learned that responding too quickly in these situations often led to misunderstandings. Marine Corps Special Operations Command is developing a new training program for urban warfare and counterterrorism operations. We need instructors with real combat experience in those environments. Your background makes you an ideal candidate. Major General Morrison leaned forward. This would involve an accelerated promotion to Staff Sergeant and assignment to our training command at Camp Lejeune. You would be developing curriculum and training some of our most elite units. Sarah considered the offer carefully. It was an opportunity that most Marines would accept without hesitation, a chance to jump directly to advanced ranks and work with Special Operations Forces. But it was also exactly what she had been trying to avoid. Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I want to complete my recruit training with Platoon 3012. Webb looked surprised. Chun, you've already demonstrated capabilities far beyond anything recruit training can teach you. Why would you want to continue with basic training when you could be contributing at a much higher level? Sarah thought about her fellow recruits, particularly Martinez, who had been working with desperate intensity to prove himself worthy of her respect. She thought about Williams and Johnson and the others who had begun to see themselves differently because of what she had shown them was possible. Sir, when I joined the YPJ, I thought I understood what it meant to be a soldier. I learned tactics, I learned to shoot, I learned to fight. But it took me years to learn that being a warrior isn't just about individual capabilities. It's about lifting up the people around you, about making your entire unit stronger. She paused, choosing her words carefully. My fellow recruits aren't just learning to be Marines. They're learning to believe in themselves, to push beyond what they thought possible. If I leave now, I abandon that responsibility. More importantly, I abandon the chance to learn from them. Colonel Webb exchanged glances with Morrison. Learn from them? Chun, with respect, what could these recruits possibly teach you? Sarah smiled, thinking about the conversation she'd had with Martinez the night before, when he had finally worked up the courage to apologize properly and ask for her help in improving his leadership skills. They're teaching me what it means to be part of something bigger than myself, sir. They're teaching me that strength shared is stronger than strength hoarded. They're reminding me why I became a soldier in the first place. Morrison nodded slowly. You want to complete your transformation from a combat veteran into a Marine? Yes, ma'am. I can always be an instructor later. But I can only be a recruit once, and I can only earn my place in this brotherhood once. I don't want to skip that process. Webb closed his file folder. Very well, Chun. Complete your training. But understand that this offer will remain open. The Marine Corps needs instructors with your experience and your dedication. As Sarah was escorted back to her barracks, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. 3 months ago, she had been a damaged veteran trying to find her place in a world that seemed too peaceful to make sense. Now she was part of a brotherhood that was teaching her new meanings of strength, honor, and service. When she entered the barracks, she found her fellow recruits waiting for her with expressions of concern. Martinez stepped forward, his face serious. Chun, we heard you got called away again. Are they going to take you out of our platoon? Sarah looked around at the faces that had become familiar, at the young people who had started as strangers and were becoming something like family. No, Martinez. I'm staying right here until we all graduate together. The relief on their faces was immediate and genuine. Over the past weeks, Sarah had become more than just their unofficial instructor. She had become the standard against which they measured themselves, the reminder that excellence was possible even under the most difficult circumstances. Good, Williams said firmly. Because we still have a lot to learn from you. Sarah shook her head. We all have a lot to learn from each other. That's what makes us a team. As the lights went out that night, Sarah lay in her bunk listening to the familiar sounds of her sleeping platoon mates. For the first time since leaving Syria, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The final weeks of recruit training at Paris Island carried a weight and intensity that transformed every member of Platoon 3012 in ways that extended far beyond military skills. What had begun as a collection of individual young people pursuing personal goals had evolved into something unprecedented, a unit forged together by shared challenge and extraordinary mentorship. Sarah's presence had changed not just her fellow recruits, but the drill instructors as well. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez found himself questioning training methods he had used for years, incorporating techniques he learned from watching Sarah work with struggling recruits. Gunnery Sergeant Price had begun documenting Sarah's marksmanship instruction methods for potential inclusion in official Marine Corps training manuals. The transformation was most visible in Martinez, who had evolved from an insecure bully into a thoughtful leader whose respect for Sarah had grown into genuine friendship. The night before their final field exercise, he approached her with a request that surprised both of them. Chun, I've been thinking about what happens after graduation. I know you could probably get assigned anywhere you want, work with any unit you choose. But I was wondering, would you consider staying with some of us? Maybe we could all get assigned to the same unit. Sarah looked up from the letter she was writing to her parents, the first communication she'd had with them since leaving for recruit training. Martinez, that's not really how Marine Corps assignments work. We'll all go where the needs of the service require us. I know that. But maybe if we all requested similar specialties, similar duty stations. Martinez sat down on his bunk across from her. Look, I know I was a complete ass when we first got here. I was scared and stupid, and I took it out on you because I thought you were an easy target. Sarah set down her pen. Martinez, we've talked about this. You don't need to keep apologizing. It's not about apologizing anymore. It's about learning. These past 2 months, watching you work with all of us, seeing how you handle leadership and responsibility, I've learned more about being a Marine from you than from all the drill instructors combined. Martinez paused, struggling with emotions he wasn't used to expressing. I want to be the kind of leader you are. Someone who makes everyone around them better. But I don't know how to do that on my own. Sarah studied his face, seeing the genuine transformation that had taken place. The arrogant, insecure boy who had tried to intimidate her was gone, replaced by a young man who was beginning to understand what real leadership required. Martinez, the fact that you're asking that question means you're already becoming that leader. Real leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about caring more about your people's success than your own ego. She gestured around the barracks where their platoon mates were engaged in their evening routines. Look around. Everyone here has grown stronger because we've all pushed each other. Williams is a better marksman because you helped him with his shooting stance. Johnson is a better leader because you started listening to his ideas instead of dismissing them. That's leadership. The final field exercise, known as the Crucible, was designed to be the ultimate test of everything the recruits had learned. 54 hours of continuous challenges, physical demands, and problem-solving scenarios that would determine who earned the right to call themselves Marines. For most platoons, the Crucible was a grueling ordeal that pushed recruits to their absolute limits. For Platoon 3012, it became something different, an opportunity to demonstrate the teamwork and tactical excellence they had developed under Sarah's guidance. The first challenge involved a simulated night patrol through hostile territory. Standard doctrine called for a slow, cautious advance with regular security halts. Sarah had taught them a modified technique that balanced speed with security, allowing them to cover more ground while maintaining tactical integrity. As they moved through the darkened training area, Sarah found herself in an unfamiliar position, following instead of leading. Martinez had been designated patrol leader for this exercise, and she was deliberately staying in the background to let him develop his own leadership style. Chun, Martinez whispered during a security halt, I'm seeing movement about 200 meters to our northeast. Can you confirm? Sarah raised her night vision device and studied the area Martinez had indicated. She could see drill instructors positioned to simulate enemy forces, exactly where her tactical analysis had predicted they would be. Confirmed. 2 personnel in defensive positions. Recommend we adjust our route to avoid contact. Martinez nodded and signaled the course change to the rest of the patrol. His movements were confident now, his decisions based on sound tactical principles rather than bravado. The patrol completed their mission in record time with no simulated casualties, earning praise from the evaluating instructors that was normally reserved for much more advanced units. The second day brought challenges that tested individual skills and group cohesion. During a combat medical scenario, Williams found himself treating a simulated casualty with multiple injuries while under simulated enemy fire. He had learned the techniques from Sarah, but this was his first time applying them under pressure. Talk me through it, Williams, Sarah called from her position providing security. What's your priority? Airway, breathing, circulation, Williams replied, his hands steady despite the stress. Securing the airway first, then checking for chest wounds. Good. What's your next step? Williams worked through the medical procedures exactly as Sarah had taught him, his confidence growing with each successful intervention. When the exercise concluded, the evaluating corpsman pulled Williams aside. Son, where did you learn those trauma care techniques? That's some of the best battlefield medicine I've seen from a recruit. Williams grinned. Chin taught us, corpsman. She knows everything. The final challenge of the Crucible was designed to test leadership under extreme stress. Each recruit would take turns leading the platoon through a complex tactical scenario while exhausted, hungry, and emotionally drained. When Sarah's turn came to lead, the evaluating officers were particularly interested in her performance. They had heard reports about her background and wanted to see if her combat experience would translate into effective leadership of American recruits. The scenario involved a simulated urban assault against a fortified position. Sarah studied the terrain for several minutes, then gathered her platoon for a brief tactical overview. The obvious approach is a frontal assault, which is exactly what they expect us to attempt, she explained, sketching the layout in the dirt. Instead, we're going to use a modified pincer movement with Martinez leading an element to fix their attention while Williams takes a flanking team to their weak point. She assigned roles based on each recruit's strengths, positioning them to maximize their effectiveness while minimizing their exposure to simulated enemy fire. But what impressed the evaluators most was her leadership style. Remember, she told the platoon before they began, this isn't about me proving anything. It's about all of us succeeding together. Trust your training, trust each other, and nobody tries to be a hero. The assault was executed flawlessly. The platoon moved with a coordination and tactical sophistication that amazed the drill instructors, completing their objective in half the expected time with no simulated casualties. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, who had come to observe the final exercise, watched Sarah's performance with growing appreciation. After the scenario concluded, he approached her with a thoughtful expression. Chun, I've been observing Marine recruit training for 12 years, and I've never seen a recruit demonstrate that level of tactical leadership. You coordinated that assault like a seasoned infantry officer. Sarah came to attention. Thank you, sir. I had excellent Marines to work with. Hayes smiled at her deflection of personal credit. That's exactly the kind of attitude we want to see in our leaders. Have you given any thought to your career path after graduation? Sir, I'm planning to request infantry training at Camp Geiger, followed by an assignment to a line unit. I want to start at the bottom and work my way up. Chun, with your background, you could fast-track to advanced leadership positions. You could be teaching at our advanced schools or working with special operations units. Sarah had heard similar offers repeatedly over the past months, and her answer remained consistent. Sir, I want to earn my place in the Marine Corps the same way every other Marine has. I want to prove myself at the squad level before I ask anyone to follow me at higher levels. Hayes nodded approvingly. That's the mark of a true leader. Very well. But know that the Marine Corps will be watching your career with great interest. The graduation ceremony took place on a crisp Friday morning in November. Families had traveled from across the country to watch their sons and daughters become United States Marines. Sarah's parents had flown in from California, still struggling to understand their daughter's journey from college student to Kurdish fighter to American Marine. As the newly minted Marines stood in formation wearing their dress blue uniforms for the first time, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. The scared, traumatized veteran who had arrived at Paris Island 4 months earlier was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to integrate her combat experience with the traditions and values of the Marine Corps. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez delivered the final address to Platoon 3012, his voice carrying the pride and emotion that came with seeing recruits transform into Marines. Ladies and gentlemen, you have completed one of the most challenging training programs in the world. You are no longer recruits. You are United States Marines, and you will carry that title with honor for the rest of your lives. He paused, his eyes finding Sarah in the formation. Some of you came here with advantages, some with disadvantages. Some of you had to overcome fear. Others had to overcome arrogance. But all of you had to learn the most important lesson the Marine Corps teaches, that individual excellence means nothing without the commitment to lift up those around you. After the ceremony, as families celebrated with their new Marines, Martinez approached Sarah with an expression of nervous determination. Chun, I have something for you. He pulled out a small wrap package. It's not much, but I wanted you to have something to remember us by. Sarah unwrapped the gift to find a small wooden plaque with the Platoon 3012 emblem and an inscription. To the Marine who taught us that strength shared is stronger than strength hoarded. Semper Fidelis. Martinez, this is thank you. I'll treasure it. There's something else, Martinez said. I talked to everyone in the platoon, and we all want the same thing. We want to put in for the same duty station, the same unit if possible. We know it's a long shot, but we want to stay together. Sarah looked around at the faces of her platoon mates, seeing the same determination in all of them. These young people who had started as strangers had become something more than friends. They had become family, forged together by shared challenge and mutual support. I'd like that too, she said simply. 6 months later, Lance Corporal Sarah Chun stood in the squad bay at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, preparing for deployment with 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines. 7 other members of Platoon 3012 had been assigned to the same battalion, including Martinez, who had emerged as one of the most promising young leaders in the company. Their deployment would take them to eastern Syria, where they would be working with Kurdish forces to continue operations against ISIS remnants and other terrorist organizations. For Sarah, it would be a return to a land she knew well, but this time as a United States Marine serving alongside allies she had once fought beside. The night before deployment, Sarah received a package with no return address. Inside was a letter written in Kurdish and a small stone from the hills around Kobani. The letter was signed by survivors of her old YPJ unit, women who had heard about her new career and wanted to wish her success. "We are proud to know that our sister now serves with the American Marines," the letter read. "May you continue to be a bridge between our peoples and a guardian of the innocent." Sarah placed the stone in her pack alongside the plaque from her platoon mates. Both represented parts of her journey, pieces of the identity she had built from combat experience, trauma, healing, and the discovery that strength shared truly was stronger than strength hoarded. As she looked around the squad bay at the Marines preparing for deployment, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Parris Island as a broken veteran seeking redemption and purpose. She was leaving as a United States Marine who had learned that true strength came not from what she had survived alone, but from what she could help others achieve together. The young woman who had once been mocked as weak and out of place had become the foundation upon which an entire platoon had built their confidence and competence. The sniper with over 100 confirmed kills had discovered that her greatest weapon was not her rifle, but her ability to see potential in others and help them realize it. In the morning, they would deploy to a war zone where her experience and their training would be tested in ways that no exercise could simulate. But Sarah was no longer the solitary warrior she had been in Syria. She was part of something larger now, part of a brotherhood that valued courage, honor, and commitment above individual achievement. As she had learned during those transformative months at Parris Island, a true warrior's greatest victory was not in the enemies they defeated, but in the allies they raised up. And by that measure, Lance Corporal Sarah Chun had already achieved more than most warriors could hope for in a lifetime of service. The mocked recruit had become a respected Marine, not by demanding recognition for her past accomplishments, but by proving that real leadership meant making everyone around her better than they thought they could be. In doing so, she had found not just a new career, but a new understanding of what it truly meant to serve with honor.